Hey, Joe.
Hey Luke, how's it going?
It's going all right. Hey, I wanted to ask you, did you see this? So, Jason from the All In podcast basically issued a challenge when he said that it was, in all caps, impossible to steal the presidential election. And then he gave some reasons, but they felt kind of lame. And election integrity is an important issue for democracy, so I wanted to dig in. Anyway, that's the
Yeah,
setup.
I heard something about this. I think someone sent it to me. It seems pretty interesting, but yeah, very forceful.
Yeah, very short. He is, there's very little doubt in his posts. So I kind of wanted to pressure test this a little bit. And I think today, what I wanted to share with you are some of the current cases of alleged fraud or questions on election integrity that are out there, just to kind of give you a sense of what's happening. Then I was going to zoom into Pennsylvania specifically and check to see how they administer the election there and identify where some of the weaknesses are. And then after I identify those weaknesses, I'm going to show you how, if I were a criminal mastermind, how I would try and crack Pennsylvania. Then after we go through all the stuff that I learned, we're going to kind of revisit this thread here and try to assess it. What do you think?
Sounds good. Put that blueprint together for 2028.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of build it now so that, we don't have to rush when 2028 comes. But let's go through sort of the different instances of fraud that are sort of out here for 2024. So this was a case of fraudulent voter registrations in Pennsylvania in Lancaster County. The DA gave a statement, which I'll quote. The clerk received about 2,500 applications at or near the deadline for registering to vote. They were uncovered since numerous applications had the same handwriting, were filled out on the same day with unknown signatures, and some were previously registered voters. And the signatures on file did not match the signatures on the application. ... Indicators of fraud included inaccuracies with the addresses listed on the applications, false personal identification information, as well as false names, end quote. She later says that in some cases, the applications contained entirely correct personal information, address, name, social security number, but when detectives asked the supposed individual, they informed detectives that they did not request the form.
This is 2,500 forms. They think from the same person with this combination of one person writing them out with fake information, than others with real
Yeah.
information.
So let me get to
Like
the
a
next
single
one.
person, it seems like.
So let me get to the next one. That's a good question. This was another separate case in Pennsylvania, but this time it was in Monroe County. And to read from here, it says the fraudulent applications appear to be linked to a Field Plus Media Corps, a Lancaster County-based organization, end quote.
Hmm.
And Lancaster County is where the previous story happened. Now, in this case, they only identified about 30 suspicious forms during a routine review. But the article also mentioned a York County, which, quote, received thousands of voter registration forms and mail-in ballot applications from Field and Media Corps as part of the Everybody Votes campaign. So to answer your question, it's not an individual. It's usually it's an NGO of some kind.
Interesting.
At least in this
So
case. There was another case in
yes, that was
2020.
30 in Monroe, and then you said another one was in the thousands.
The first one that I mentioned, this guy, the Lancaster County, they think they identified 2,500, which were fraudulent. Um,
Hmm.
you know, the yeah. But in the next one, they only identified 30. This was in Monroe.
Is that enough to tip things one way or the other?
I don't think so. Well, you got to do it at the whole state level. And 2,500 would not be enough to move a state, even by the thinnest margins. Um, unless it's like Florida in the year 2000. So this was a case, you can see it dated up October 29th. And my understanding of the story is as follows. So the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which I discussed briefly on the previous episode, that act prohibits states from engaging in a, quote, systematic process of cleaning the voter rolls within something like 90 days before an election. Now, the argument being that it is possible that some eligible voters will unintentionally and mistakenly be removed from the voter roll during the cleaning process. Now, that would be bad, right? So the states can't do it. You don't want like an eligible voter to show up to vote, and all of a sudden he or she can't because they've been mistakenly cleaned from the voter roll. Now, the Biden administration sued Virginia, accusing Virginia of engaging in a systemic program during this 90-day quiet period of cleaning the voter roll. Now, Biden won, but then Virginia appealed. It reached the Supreme Court, and it was overturned. So Virginia could continue to clean its voter roll. Now, I just kind of glanced at the Supreme Court's decision, so I can't say that I've mastered the argument, but it sounded somewhat pedantic around the terminology used, particularly around the word program. Felt like it was kind of lawyered up. But that was something that sort of kind of bounced around the news, and that's some of the background. Another story here was in Bucks County. This is also Pennsylvania, I think. A lot of people might have heard this because the viral event was kind of less about Buck County and more because a news person stormed out while the host was presenting what happened. But what happened, Trump sued Bucks County, arguing that early voters were turned away. Now, Trump won, and the courts forced the early voting stations to remain open longer to accommodate. And what went viral was during a Washington Post news coverage discussion, the host, that's this guy, and the other guest, that's her, were contorting the case as saying that as Trump was doing this to, quote, lay the groundwork to contest the election by complaining that cheating was taking place. And the host, made air quotes around cheating. Hewitt, this guy, then admonished the host and said, basically, we are news people. We need to report what happened. As news people, we need to mention that Trump sued, he won, and that the courts will remain open. That's the story. Then he called their little powwow a campaign ad for Camel and stormed off.
Well,
anyway, so again, if you want to actually watch it, we keep all of the links in the presentation on the slide, and then we'll link to the presentation in the show notes. Give another one. This one out of Colorado. So in this case, they believe that ballots were intercepted. So they say about a dozen voters had their mail-in ballots taken in, basically, from their mailbox, and then someone voted and mailed it back without their knowledge.
Interesting. But
this
very
one's
small numbers.
These are all small numbers, yeah. Yeah. So at the end of all this, I'm kind of going to ask for your impressions, and I'll give you some of mine. So this one is out of Nevada. And what happened was the election clerks received mail-in ballots that did not have a postmark on them. And Republicans, I think in this case Trump, they wanted to have those not count. And the court disagreed, so the clerk will be able to count those. And the case also acknowledges that this would impact a minuscule number of ballots. So in this case, I think Trump sued and he lost. The last one I'll mention is a Chinese student successfully voted in the American election. So let me just summarize this paragraph in red. He was a 19-year-old from China, non-citizen, registered to vote using his I guess that must be the University of Michigan, student identification, and other documentation establishing his residency in Ann Arbor. Now, he represented that he was a U.S. citizen, and then he cast a ballot. I think the only reason that he was caught was the student asked the local clerk's office if he can get the ballot back. But it turns out the clerk can't get the ballots, even if they wanted to, since their system doesn't allow someone to track a casted ballot back to a voter. So those are a couple things. I kind of want to get your impression, just kind of reading that. And then I'll kind of share sort of what I thought when I was looking through these.
Yeah, so I mean, just kind of off the top, like one of the things that we've even said a couple of times here so far, these seem to be very small numbers. And then, in theory, even if you were to take the first example of, 2,500 registrations, it would still be quite difficult to have any material effect on an entire state. And then, but that said, some of the other cases in terms of like actual voting that occurred, like fraudulently through someone else's name or a non-citizen, it's like dozens of votes tops, like a couple votes. That's
Yeah.
basically statistically zero.
Yeah.
But on the lawsuits filed by Biden and Trump, it's more ambiguous on how large that kind of outcome could have had. So, did it give any indication on like the number of names that could have been impacted by Virginia trying, or uh, cleaning up like the ballot records? Like, was this in the thousands, the tens of thousands, or just a few here and there? And
Oh
then I
yeah, that's
guess
a
you
good.
could say kind of like, or sorry, and then ask the same question about um, Trump's case as well. Like, how many additional people could have voted or not in that extended time period?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in terms of the cleaning of voter rolls, they're looking at rolls of tens, if not hundreds of thousands. That doesn't mean that they're going to be gone. I just
Right.
think that's the kind of numbers they're dealing with.
Right, but so that pool is orders of magnitude larger than some of these
Yeah,
other cases. In
yeah,
theory, what's the process with the state government process of actually cleaning up those roles? I've got no idea.
yeah. Yeah. No, that was definitely one of my takeaways. The fact that so far the fraud out there is really just sort of small instances. These aren't the kind of numbers generally that would be able to sort of win or lose an election. Kind of the other thing I didn't realize was how much legal activity there was, like right before an election. Um, so, like honestly, I started to get kind of, if you want to get in the head of somebody who's in the war room for these things, like Trump, and he's hearing from his lawyers in counties all across the country that this is happening and this is happening. You can like kind of start to see why he would be biased towards thinking that it was stolen from him in a way. And I'm not saying it's reasonable or whatever to think that. I'm just trying to
Right.
like get into the head a little bit.
Just like, yeah,
Again,
put yourself in those shoes.
yeah, I definitely had no idea there was like this much. I mean, they were like literally down to like the hour. You know, their lawyers would send to court something, a decision, and then the court will come back really quick, like the next day or something. I didn't even realize it could
Hmm.
happen that quickly. Um,
Interesting. And then, like, one of the other things it reminds me of is just in general in the aftermath of the election. It's anytime any news outlet would, uh, like, in some way talk about Trump complaining about this or whatnot. It seemed like almost exclusively it would be prefaced or closed off by saying Trump accused without evidence, without
yeah,
showing any evidence,
yeah,
like heavily implying he's just making them up with nothing.
yeah,
When in fact he filed some lawsuits which were um, you know done against him, but then overturned by the Supreme
yeah.
Court, and that's a material point right there. I didn't hear anything about that.
As we established on an earlier episode, every state administers the election somewhat differently, and I want to take a closer look at Pennsylvania. So, if I was a criminal mastermind, for instance, I think Pennsylvania would be the focus point. That was an important state for this past election.
Mm-hmm.
If you saw the last episode, you recognize these screenshots. On the left is the Democracy Scorecard from MAP, the Movement Advancement Project, which is a left leaning organization who prioritizes, in my estimation, voter turnout. Now, on the right is the Election Integrity Scorecard from the Heritage Foundation, which prioritizes election integrity. So let's zoom in on some of the major steps to voting. These, at the very least, would need to be bypassed. Now, besides this, into my little case study, I want to introduce one other factor that I consider to be at my disposal in this situation, which is undocumented or illegal migrants. My gut tells me that defrauding the government by intercepting ballots or using fake IDs, or sort of the idea that Jason outlined, wouldn't work at scale. But I'm trying to think of there might be other ways to do it. So let's look at how Pennsylvania registers voters. I went to the website to see what was needed to register to vote in Pennsylvania. This is all pretty standard. They ask for personal information, address, name, etc. A few things I wanted to highlight. One section is on identification. Now, the website has three different options: a PA driver's license, or PennDOT, DOT, that's Department of Transportation, ID. Another is the last four digits of your social security number. And then the last option is a checkbox to say that you don't have either of these. So it's kind of like, okay, do you need one or not? The other thing to highlight here is the declaration section. This is, as far as I can tell, the control to stop non-citizens from voting. It's a check mark and a threat, basically. Now, the threat would work on me, quite frankly, but I wanted to see if there was something else done at the clerk's office to confirm this.
So
Yeah.
if you check the box that says I don't have either of those forms of ID, or
I don't
don't have
know.
this ID or a social security number, like where does it go from there? I mean,
Yeah,
because in
I
theory, if
don't.
you're thinking about this, you just tell a bunch of people to go online. You could even
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't go that far. I didn't actually want to start pushing buttons and try to register in Pennsylvania. Um, that's
have
as far as
people
I
knocking on your door.
that's as far as I'd go. Yeah, I think there even was like big red lettering at the beginning that just said, the time to register has already passed when I was doing this. So I didn't go that far. There was actually sort of on the cutting room floor of when I was coming up with the notes for this. There was someone from, it was another state, Georgia maybe, but she narrated as she actually went through the process. She just made up a ballot. She like made up a name, made up an address. She clicked
Hmm.
some buttons, and she actually got, I think, like a printout ballot. So she's just like demonstrated that you can just BS your way through this just with fake information. I don't
Okay,
know if
so
it would get
like
caught
this,
later.
yeah.
Um,
But in
I don't
general,
know
it's
if,
like in contrast to some of those earlier ones that were 30 ballots, 10 ballots, or whatever it was. Like this is something that starts to look like it could be a little scalable. Like a single person could extremely easily. You could even ask ChatGPT to write some simple, Python script to fill these things out randomly. Get
yeah,
some database of addresses and just click I don't have either of these things for anything. Do it at some randomized way over some period of time, and random time increments to
yeah,
just take some programmatic ways of trying to mask what you're doing. That starts to look a lot more scalable than using fake
yeah,
IDs, intercepting, individual people's real mail. Like obviously that's not scalable. You would get caught doing that eventually if you tried to do it that many times. But
yeah.
conceivably, a single person could do this at least hundreds or thousands of times.
The Heritage Foundation has a section in its methodology called Verification of Citizenship, which I'm going to lean on here kind of for this section. And in their methodology, they explain that the Department of Homeland Security has a program, the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlement Program, that could be used also to verify an applicant's immigration status. So other agencies use SAVE to determine if the individual should receive public assistance benefits. And there's nothing stopping county clerks to reference it as well when verifying someone's citizenship status. Now, the other way Heritage Foundation suggests the clerk's office could verify citizenship is through jury lists. And according to the Heritage Foundation, their scorecard, Pennsylvania receives 0 points in regard to verification of citizenship. So down here, they'll show that it doesn't look like they do either. So
Hmm.
in terms of if I wanted to like register to vote for something, it seems like this might be a weakness. Something that a criminal mastermind might want to take advantage of. Now, maybe they do something else. I don't know. I stopped digging basically at this point. I'm hoping that the policy is something like trust but verify. But you can
Hmm.
have an applicant, make a declaration, but you really need to be able to see if what they said is true. And I think that this is a weakness that has been exploited, like the actual case in Michigan, where a college student, a non-U.S. citizen, successfully cast a ballot. Now, this is not Michigan, this is Pennsylvania, but at the very least, it is possible in some states. Now, the next thing I would want to look at is the mail-in ballot. So the information that they ask for when applying to receive a mail-in ballot is pretty similar: name, address, if you had help with the form, yada yada yada. Now, I wanted to zoom in onto the ID they requested. So they do request an ID, which seems important. So they ask for a photocopy of your ID, and they prompt you for a driver's license or SSN number. And if you don't have those, you can provide other types of ID. Now, the form here, this is the actual form for the mail-in ballot. It doesn't list those out. You have to go to a website. And that's what this is over here on the right side. Now, the option 3, so the other IDs that you could send them in, that includes a U.S. passport. That's great. The U.S. military ID, also good. But then it starts getting a little kind of into gray areas. You need a photo employee ID issued at any level of federal, state, or local government. Okay. An institution of higher learning, or a photo ID issued by a pen care facility. Now, besides the first two, those other IDs do not prove that you are a U.S. citizen. And in fact, like a driver's license doesn't mean you are a U.S. citizen.
Right.
They only prove that you are you.
And it also seems quite easy to forge those kind of things, quite honestly. All right, the good stuff. Here we go.
Here's the good stuff. All right, so that's some of the background. That's some of your base knowledge here. This is the system that we're trying to defraud.
Right.
Okay. Now, if I were a criminal mastermind, which I might be, Joe, I wouldn't tell you. This is how I would do it. Or this is how I would start to think about it. I would want to use a combination of those sort of election integrity weaknesses. I would use NGOs, and I would think to use real people, migrants, legal or not. I mean, you mentioned kind of the idea of using, sending in ballots and making a program that could do it. And that seems to make sense. I don't know why, but my mind sort of drifted into wanting to actually use real people, if possible. Because I kind of want to, what you're doing is very obviously wrong, whereas I'm kind of trying to manage the gray area. I'm trying to get kind of the fuzzy area where it's defensible.
Right.
And so what I would do would put a bunch of illegal immigrants into a place like a hotel or an abandoned state prison, which is a true story actually in Massachusetts. There were some news articles in Pennsylvania about keeping migrants in an abandoned school. Not sure if that happened. That's kind of what I would push. I would get them all in kind of one place. We would be, because one of the hurdles here is we need them to have addresses of some kind.
Right.
Applications typically say they cannot accept PO boxes. And this is honestly one of the bigger hurdles in my diabolical plans here. How do you get 500 people registered to an address? Would it be one address? Would we have everyone put down the school? Or can we have different prison cells, different addresses, like in a hotel or an apartment complex? Or would, somebody reviewing this, assuming there is a person on the other side, sort of managing and checking this, how they wouldn't catch it?
Right. Yeah, but I mean, like you said, it's if we're talking about migrants, we know over the past 4 years it's been on the order of millions that have come into the country.
It's millions, yeah.
Into some of the big cities, for example, it's hundreds of thousands, and there's tons and tons of stories about that, occupying schools and community centers and all these things for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
So in a big city, I'm not sure how much that, I guess, would that make a difference I guess at the state level, if you push it far enough, you could do it in a big city rather than, it's you kind of play the game between getting too much press on you in a big city with too much scale versus going to a smaller area or something like that and trying to geographically.
Right. Yeah. I think it would be tough to spread it out rurally, but you could probably hide a lot more people in a city, and then the address sort of gets a little fuzzy since they're all big buildings anyway. Mm-hmm. So that would sort of be the first step. I think getting ID is kind of a big deal. Now, I'm not 100% sure that I need ID. Now, it's not totally clear to me that I need one even to register in Pennsylvania, and it is not needed for in-person voting. So maybe the first thing you would think in these plans would be well, maybe just have them physically go to the polling station. I don't think I could realistically get that many people to a polling station. Mailing just kind of feels like a nice distance to put between yourself and the target. It's easier to carry a piece of paper to a person than a person to a voting place. Maybe that's not the maybe that's not the right approach. But still, I would try to get them.
In theory, it's let's say you do pull it off. You've got some, I don't know, school or community center, or a network of some of those, and you have as many people as you can, ask them, like you said, to register to vote for a mail-in ballot. And
Yes.
these are, people that are new to the country, don't really know what's what, maybe that much, maybe they don't know exactly how the
Right.
mail system works.
Yeah.
You could think about how wherever that institution receives mail, now you could pick up that,
Yeah.
500 mail-in ballots.
Yeah. So let me. Yeah, so I'm going to get there. So I would try to get them IDs of any kind as fast as possible. Now it looks like the Pennsylvania Democrats have tried before to get legal IDs for undocumented immigrants, although I think that failed. That was Bill, I guess, 279 or something, and I think it failed a couple of years ago, like 2022. That's this down here, dead as of November 30th, 2022. Another approach is ICE, I guess, which did have an illegal aliens ID card, which as a criminal mastermind, I would, want a lot more of those.
Right.
If
And then
those
that's
don't
kind of
work,
like also where the political component comes into place. Say, I'm really advocating for this humanitarian effort for these
yeah,
individuals that are here.
there would be arguments, yes, to have. I think the reason for the ICE is it just like facilitates the process afterwards if they have an ID. After they enter into the country and they need to go through the kind of the process, and that can take some time, and it's just easier to have an ID if they had an ID. Down here, the immigrants and driver's license. Right here, it looks like Pennsylvania does not offer driving privileges to unauthorized immigrants. A couple of these other states do. Massachusetts, where I'm based out of, does. But in Pennsylvania, that's our target. Apparently no. Otherwise, again, it's 2024. I'm looking to 2028. Kind of one thing you could do, start to lean on this sort of on our NGO to come up with some sort of an excuse to issue an ID. Now, remember, they could be a school ID or they could be a care facility, right? An issue sort of
Yeah, that's the other thing. What
kind of a BS ID like that.
what exactly constitutes a care facility? But yeah, I
Yeah,
guess
I'm
something
sure. I'm sure you need like some
bigger.
sort of accreditation or whatever. But here's the thing, right? The thing about like passports and driver's license is that if somebody like a clerk is reviewing them, then they become very familiar with what they look like. Right? You know what like a driver's license is supposed to look like. Now, I'm not saying you try to make a fake one, but when you open it up to include IDs from universities or care facilities and government IDs, and the person reviewing it all of a sudden is going to be exposed to like this ridiculously wide range of different IDs. So you sort of even drop off asking yourself, is this legitimate ID? So even if you like see an ID you've never seen before, if I, as an NGO, designed my own ID and a clerk
Right.
doesn't have any prior knowledge of what that ID looks like, but it looks like an ID, it has,
Mhm.
it has a name, a picture, a birth date, whatever.
Right.
That would be big.
But then
And
that
I
also
think,
raises the question, like, relatively how many of these registrations that are getting checked uses, a standardized government ID or driver's license versus not? Because if it's
mhm,
99.5% of them that do, then it's going it could be quite obvious if you got more of a phony one. But like you're saying, if that's more common, then yeah, then they might get used to seeing so many they're not exactly familiar with, and then might just naturally be a little more lenient.
right. I mean, you kind of have to be if you're a clerk reviewing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an ID that looks like an ID, but you don't recognize it, how much time are you going to spend sort of drilling in to see how legitimate this whole institution or organization is? And like universities already kind of boast that they're here to protect undocumented migrants.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an NGO that taught U.S. civics or something to non-citizens. You could, the NGO could be paid for by like a Get Out the Vote super PAC or something. Anyway, just throwing that out there, spitballing here, spitballing our criminal mastermind
Yeah.
plans here. So, kind of the other thing, leaning on kind of the NGOs, I'd have them either canvass their own school or care facility, or have them go to the locations where the non-citizens are being housed, as I was shown a few slides ago. And then this is sort of another challenging part in my scheme. I think NGOs are sort of like a concentrated group of ideologues. so they don't need a whole lot of convincing. I think they can operate in that gray area just from their own
Mhm.
convictions, or that they are filled with kids. And I think kind of those kids might be more susceptible to financial incentives. So, GBI Strategies, this name on the left here, this was a group in Michigan that allegedly took part in a fraudulent voter registration scheme in 2020. They were somewhat accused with some of these, like get out to votes, like they were sending in also fraudulent registration things. And the Field Media Corps, which we sort of talked about earlier, now this is the one from Pennsylvania in the 2024. Now, like, to be sure, I'm not saying that they're actually trying to defraud the entire election, right? What I think probably happened is there were some kids that were employed there and they were being paid by the number of registrations that they got. And they might just have started writing down their own. But my point is here is that I think incentives matter. And I think this is sort of where I might want to operate.
Mhm.
But regardless, you need to keep everyone involved. So that's the people who work at the NGO. And that would also be the migrants actually sort of trying to register the absentee ballots at a safe distance. Like there has to be a certain amount of plausible deniability between overt fraud and this gray area that I'm trying to operate in.
Mhm.
So, I'm kind of laughing because this is kind of ridiculous. But
Well, I mean,
for,
that's the difference here between the criminal mind and the criminal
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a
mastermind.
nice guy. I'm just pressure testing the system here, and so are all our viewers. But for the immigrant, right? The immigrant could say that this NGO person put this piece of paper in front of me. I was worried. It was already filled out. They just asked me to sign it. Then they said, then the NGO said it had to do with me staying in the country longer, and I really can't go back to my home country, so I signed the registration and the application, although I didn't really know that's what I was doing. Now, the NGO people could say that we facilitate the registration of voters. That is what we do. We fill out as much of the form as we can, and it is against our policy to ask if they are U.S. citizens, as it would be discriminatory or prejudiced to ask that. Also, we are nonpartisan. Now, we don't know which way people are going to vote, so it doesn't really matter. All we're trying to do is, maximize the turnout at every election. And they sign it. We don't force their hand. And I think like navigating that sort of gray area on both
Right.
sides, might be difficult at the beginning. Might take a few cycles to sort of figure out the best way to finesse it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, like you said, it's not forcing someone's hand, but making it extremely easy for them to, you know, move the hand on their own.
yeah. Now the actual act of filling out the ballot is sort of like screwing up my plans here. Like, do the migrants, or whoever it is that we're canvassing, do they do it? Um, does the NGO do it and give it to them to actually sign the ballot? That would be much tougher because then there's really there's like, you can't really sell any gray area anymore, I feel like. So like in that
Yeah, it's
sense,
like you mean like going into the voting booth on election day to
well, yeah, no.
physically.
So I would do this all by mail in. So what we recently
Right.
just did was we received the mail in ballots, but
Hmm.
on those things you actually have a form that you have to fill out. You got to get a pen, fill in these little bubbles, and it's like, could you really think that a migrant wouldn't know what they're doing? That what they're doing is wrong? I mean, it's no longer
I
just like, oh, here's
mean,
a form, sign it.
they
We're
might
here to
just not
help you.
care.
It's
I
like
mean, I think
they
there's
might just
plenty
not
of
care.
incentives in place
Maybe,
for that to be the
maybe.
case.
But when I was like sort of just sort of imagining this thing out, this is kind of where I'm getting a little hung up. If you wanted to go like the super evil route, maybe that would just be the criminal mastermind might just do it personally, and then just try to like forge the signatures or something.
Hmm.
I wouldn't
But
trust.
then, I mean, that probably wouldn't work though, because like in the first example, those registrations were found, like it said there, in the same handwriting. So it was that obvious
Well,
that.
so yes, you would definitely have to take pains, and that would be difficult. Yeah, there's like those three lines where you just write like the name, you print the
Mhm.
name, you print your address, and then you sign it. That is like a legit control. Um, and there's somebody on the other side actually reviewing this stuff.
like going back to the idea of the NGO that's facilitating, or their goal is to maximize turnout.
Yep.
I mean, depending on the scope of your operation, you can have a small amount of individuals that knowingly or not, do the registration and then end up voting when they shouldn't be. If your scope's big enough, even if you get 10% of them, if you're operating on tens of thousands of people here, you could start to get close to that tipping point in like a really razor sharp state.
That's kind of one of the lines of thought that I kind of came up with, and sort of some of the issues with it and some of the challenges, I think. But if we went back and revisited sort of Jason's post here, my impression is like at the highest level, I generally agree with him. This would be difficult. I don't think it would be impossible. And impossible is not a word that I would expect to hear from a founder, but it's extremely difficult. Basically, election fraud does not scale easily. Kind of tiny little things, fine, but big, like tens of thousands, which is kind of the point he's making here. Generally agree with. What bothers me with his posts were the reasons. He was saying this is how you have to do it. He said you would have to steal someone's ballot. And it's like, I don't think you need to steal the ballot.
Yeah,
I think you can get one. You can get one mailed. Like he's only talking about a very narrow form of fraud.
Right. Yeah, and then if like thinking about these times specifically, 2020, the big trend was all about mail-ins.
Yeah.
This cycle, it's all about additional people in the country. If you're thinking about it seems natural you could try to fit those pieces together. Obviously you can't go around and steal so many ballots from people's mailboxes. It's just not going to work. You're just not going to have enough, even if you could do that.
So that's like one. And then this idea of needing to create a fake ID. You don't really need to create a fake ID. You need to create maybe a photocopy of a fake ID.
Yeah.
But then you could just use an ID from like university or a care facility, or maybe just make up your own. Or it could even be real. I mean, you can get one from ICE.
Yeah, and like
or,
using a photocopy.
You can get like you can get a driver's license in some states. And then C, then the C doesn't even is a mute point, because they're their own individual kind of person. So you're not trying to like jump in line for somebody else.
It's like a single case that he like a very narrow way in which you could think about tweeting, right. And he sets something up in such a way that it looks impossible, but that's not the only way to do things in the world.
Yeah, I think
Mastermind, that is.
Right. Clearly Jason does not have the criminal mastermind that I have. But, in general, I think his failure was like a lack of imagination. I mean, he's only considering, like I said, one avenue for fraud.
Right.
And I kind of just reading this found it frustrating, especially with the amount of conviction that he put in these tweets.
Yeah, and he's this is social media. This is social media presence. The louder and more conviction you have, the more views you might get. So like he might even be aware of all this, but he's trying to make a point. This is a way in which I could make a point online. There we go. He's got over 1 million views on this.
Yeah, exactly. But what do you think? Kind of, that's sort of, that's what I put together. I wanted to get your sort of final thoughts.
Yeah, so definitely agreed that some of these early cases that we were talking about, whether it's like stealing someone's legitimate ballot or creating some fake government ID, that very difficult and not scalable. But back to the PA registration, it's like it seems to me one of the key things in what we're kind of theoretically talking about here. If you can check that box that says I don't have a social or an ID, but I affirm that I'm a citizen, click the box. Is there another control in place? If there's not, you could easily see how then with the NGO argument that you were making, you have some organization paired with a time in history now where we're having again, millions of people coming in individual places, could be tens of thousands of people, could be a couple 100,000 in a state. If you've got 10% of people that can, they're all given the option, given instructions with how they could do this online. If you have some small percentage that do it, it
Yeah.
seems plausible, like you could start to get there. But at
Yeah.
the same time, again, that's a big if around, is it really that easy on that website to just click, I don't have anything,
Right.
yes, I affirm it. So we kind of went over the framework and, how the world works in terms of how one registers to vote in Pennsylvania, how one might think about getting around it, that kind of thing. Like one of the things I would think about next is like, well, like what has actually happened in the past? Like, is there any, like, if you were to go into the numbers, is there anything that looks like a little anomalous or something like that you're not quite sure? It's like, well, in a natural state, you wouldn't assume this kind of trend that could happen. You could run some sort of test on it to shed some more light on that. Like, for example, but one of the, something that people have been pointing out online is that, so if you look at the past, like 5 or 6 cycles, you can see this trend in total turnout. So I think like the Democrat turnout numbers in, I think 2016, it was something like 65 million. And as of now, it's like 66 million in 2024. But then in 2020, you had over like 80 million voters. So you could start to ask yourself, are there certain places where you saw unnatural spikes?
Yeah. Are you going to look into that?
I don't know. Should I? Thinking about it.
Maybe. Although admittedly, when I was like putting this together, literally once November 5th was over and I was kind of working on November 6th, I was like, oh man, we definitely missed the prime time to actually post this. So my motivation sort of just fell off a cliff come like November 6th.
Well, no,
like, I'm glad I did it.
No, we're just very early here. We're masterminding for 28.
Sorry, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we'll sit on this and we'll post it, in 2028. But no, in general, I kind of came around with this feeling a little better. Like, admittedly, there was so much talk about like cheating and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely.
After doing this exercise, even though I recognize the limit, like the weaknesses, to be able to move that number of ballots, I think would be really tough.
It does seem quite
if the Democrats, do win or cheat, they're sort of doing it by like the get out to vote thing. I think where they like the ballot harvesting, which is not. I don't think it's not illegal. It's not fraud. You just don't like it. So that's kind of where I landed. I generally just felt better about the system. So I'm kind of glad I did the exercise, and I hope people kind of either feel better or worse about it. But that said, I do think election integrity is so fantastically important, and the impression of like election integrity is just as, if not more important. That I still maintain, even though it would be extremely difficult to kind of like throw an election, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
You got to get IDs. You got to have this. You got to check this stuff. There's just cannot be one question. Like, and any fraud is too much.
Right. It's really important to go into this, like you were saying, and just do the homework there to understand more precisely what's going on, because we are drowning in so much information on social media and news outlets and whatever it may be. And everyone wants clicks, everyone wants views. So if you talk about these fantastical things, there's so much fraud, this election stolen, all blah, 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 all these things.
Yeah.
I definitely feel a lot better after seeing this, very defined framework of how these things are really done, and specific examples of cases where these things have been found. They've been extremely small, and then going into it, you can see why that's the case.
I'm starting to wonder, maybe we're positioning ourselves as a podcast in the just calm the hell down, which maybe wouldn't be the best in terms of like a business proposition. You want to go the other way. You want to get. Hopefully, there's a good market for that, though. Where, like, because these things we look into, and we're sort of like, look, again, just if I'm going to try to make or see some patterns here, we
Hmm.
go from, oh, look at this terrible thing, that's something happening. And then usually it's like, it's not that bad. And then you kind of like,
Well,
I
that's
don't know
what
if that's a
I'm going to
good,
try to do
I
next
feel
week.
better. I feel
Right.
better at the end of it.
Well, hey,
But
maybe that's
is it,
the
does it get fired? Does it get you fired up enough to like actually watch our content?
right.
I don't know, but I think, I think we should kind of keep on this path because, it's honest. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, like anything you do needs to be honest, but you could still go into a push the spiciest things. Take a certain
yeah, I
perspective.
think we got to tackle. We definitely should not shy away from the hottest topics. We should
Hmm.
definitely, that should be the first thing we go towards.
Right.
I'm just saying what we generally find so far is that it's just not, there's not as much reason to get so upset and pissed off. And so maybe like
But I
we can,
think,
maybe we can have the best of both worlds, which is like it's a hot button issue, but then at
mhm.
the end you still feel good after watching
Yeah, and I mean,
one of our
also in
episodes.
general, it's like looking at the past 10, 15 years now, thinking about just media and communications and in this country in general. It's all like past 10 years, it's all about rage bait. Like that's it.
Rage bait, yeah.
Like people talk about Facebook 2016, it was because
Yeah.
they just pushed stuff that was going to get clicks.
Yeah.
One of the themes that's I think is starting to bubble up a little bit is that people are getting tired of it. People
Yeah.
just don't want to see this stuff that it
Yeah.
becomes clear over time they're just getting outright lied to. It's like the Joe Rogan thing. It's like instead of going on, doing a traditional interview on 60 Minutes, they want to see you sit down and talk to Joe Rogan about,
Yeah.
stupid items for 3 hours.
Yeah.
It makes
Like,
you feel a little better,
bear or gorilla who would win in a fight. That's like a prototypical Joe Rogan must have had that conversation 100 times.
at least.
Um, yeah. I mean, that's a good point. So you think that there's like a market for
I don't know.
this sort of content?
But I would say that I think a big thing in this election cycle is that people are fed up of being lied to.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Um,
But
it
that
could be our
said, yeah,
brand.
for next week, I do want to try to be spicy about it.
Yeah.
I mentioned before that like during 2020, like when this was just coming out, I started to look into this stuff and I ran some statistical tests and I had decent conviction, but I could have been more rigorous. So what I want to do is I want to revisit that and think about just more academically, is this valid to think about it
Hmm.
statistically in this way? And then also pull some more data, and then just apply it on a larger scale as well.
All
So
right.
it's
That should be cool.
we'll see how much I can get done over the next few days here.
All right. All right, man. Well, that was it's another episode of the Root of All Evil podcast.
That was a lot of
Thanks
fun.
for tuning in. Yeah, I hope you guys learn something. Hope you
Feeling like
guys
a
there's
mastermind.
definitely it would make me so upset if there's no market for this sort of content. I mean, I think just like you spend hours researching something and then you get like hours of work done essentially what I
Mhm.
just like shared in 20 minutes or whatever. So that's the value add. But is there
Yeah,
market? I don't know. I don't know. I guess we'll just
and
keep
it's
plugging
like you
away
really
and find
can't know.
out.
We're
Just
not
got to
we're
keep
not
chugging away. Yeah.
marketing people here. We're not trying to
Yeah.
just create something.
No,
We're
we're
just trying to
trying
make
to.
something.
Yeah, we're trying to maybe add some value to the conversation. Basically, we'll figure it out. Find a spot. All right, man. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks, Joe, for listening.
Yeah, we'll
See you
see you
next
next
week
time.
on the Root of All Evil podcast.
See you there.
Bye bye.